Welcome to part 2 of my impressions of the Street Fighter Miniatures game. Now, if you haven't seen part 1, go check out that video. I exclusively looked at the miniatures to sort of revel in their glory, if you will, because they are incredible miniatures. But today, that's all set aside because we're going to be talking about the gameplay itself. I'm going to be giving you an overview and give my impressions of whether or not the game works, whether it does what it needs to, and most importantly, whether it's fun or not. Now, the gameplay itself revolves around card play, it revolves around rolling dice, and a combination of all that. But does it feel like Street Fighter? And like I said, is it fun? Well, let's check it out. All right, like I said, I want to try to give you an overview of the game without getting into a detailed how to play, but it is important that you probably understand the turn structure as we really dig into things. Now, to set up the game, you're going to get the board out, of course, put obstacles out on it, and each player is going to choose a character. That character is going to come with a few things. First is a deck of 40 cards. Now, the 40 cards are going to be different from character to character, but there are going to be some similarities. One of those similarities are the 4 types of cards you'll find in any given deck. You have strike, projectile, special, and event cards. And these 4 categories are going to be found in every single character deck except in different varieties. For example, one character might have more projectiles, another character might have more strikes. All the characters, I think, have the same number of events in them, but you get the idea as you play more, you're going to get a sense for what characters have what in their deck, and this is going to come into play when you're trying to counter some of their attacks. Each character also has a character card with their base movement speed and their starting health, and a detailed explanation of their ultra attack. And every player is going to get a player board. These have 2 dials, one that tracks their health, and the other one that tracks the meter. You're going to build up meter over the course of the game and hopefully use that to try to fire off that ultra attack, as well as some other things. And once the board is all set up and all the pieces and parts are in the right place, each player is going to draw up a starting hand of 5 cards from their deck. And this is that first moment where players are going to be looking at each and every one of their cards, kind of imagining and dreaming how they might put them into play, what kind of combos they might pull off, or what cards they want to hold back in the event they want to use them as a counter against an enemy attack. Now, all of this may be a little confusing if you've never played the game, so let's talk about the turn sequence, which is very, very simple. It's got 3 steps. The first one is to draw 2 cards. The second one is to move, and the third one is to fight. Now, fighting has some options, it's a little more complicated, but the first 2 are very simple. When you draw 2 cards into your hand, and you have to remember that if you have more than 7 cards at this point, you always have to immediately discard back down to 7 cards. When you move, you're simply going to move your miniature up to the move value of your character. Movement in this game is both diagonal and orthogonal, and you have to remember you can never move into another character or into any of the obstacles on the table. And the last thing you're going to do is to fight, and fighting really is where all of the action takes place. When you do this, you're going to have 4 options, and you're going to be able to do any 2 of them in any order that you want. Those 4 options are to move again, to draw 2 more cards, to play a card out of your hand, and then finally to fire off that ultra attack on your character card. But to do that, you're going to need 8 on your meter. Now, moving again or drawing 2 more cards in your hand might seem like a weak option in a game where you're trying to get out there and fight. But let me stress one more time, you're doing any 2 of these things. So, for instance, over the course of your turn, you're going to draw 2 cards, move, and then you might move 2 more times if, for instance, you're trying to get really far away from your opponent. Or you may draw a bunch more cards into your hand if you're trying to build up a massive hand for your next turn. The other thing you're going to be able to do with your cards is to play them. When you play a card, you're going to play 1 card, and it might be face up, but more often than not, it's going to be face down. Most of the event cards are going to be played face up. These have a variety of different effects that are fairly self-explanatory when you read the card. But the real meat and potatoes of this game, and I cannot stress this enough, is when you're attacking. That might sound obvious given the fact that we're talking about Street Fighter, but the mechanics here are really what make this game work as well as it does. When you do this, you declare your target and tell them you're attacking. Now this is where their mind really starts racing, because as a defender, they've got some options. They can block, they can counterattack, or they can play an event card out of their hand. Now, if they want to play it safe, they can block, and if they do this, they're just going to be gathering up their defense die to roll against the incoming attack. There are some cards they might discard in order to get more dice, but they'll start with just 2 dice by default from declaring a block. Then the attacker is going to reveal their attack card, resolving any movement or effects that it might have before the roll. Then both players are going to take their dice, roll them up, and resolve the attack. To do that, they simply count up the number of the attacker's damage icons and subtract the number of the defender's block icons. Each player can also gain meter from any of these icons that they might have rolled. And things can get even more interesting here depending on whether damage made it through or not. If the attacker did at least 1 damage, there may be some effects on their card that will trigger when that happens. But more importantly, if they did damage, they might be able to start linking into a combo. Many cards have linker icons on either the left or right or both sides of the card. If this was my first attack and it did some amount of damage, then I could look at my hand to see if I had a matching linker on the left side of another card. I could then combo into that attack by playing it face up next to the first. And I can keep that combo going as long as each new card does at least 1 damage. And for linked combos, the defender can only block or play an event card, no countering. Pulling off a combo is probably some of the most fun you can have as the attacker. And some character decks are built for more combos than others. This is just one possible combo Ken could link together. But countering may be even more fun for the defender. Let's rewind back to the beginning of the attack. Instead of blocking, the defender could try to counterattack. And a lot of players are going to gravitate towards this just from the sheer chance of trying to outsmart their opponent. When the defender counterattacks, they play a card from their hand face down as well. They're simply trying to match the category of card played by the attacker. Both cards are revealed and one of 2 things happens. If the defender did not match, for example, they played a projectile versus the attacker's strike, then their card is discarded and the attacker's card is resolved as normal, except the defender gets no block dice whatsoever. If the defender does match the card type, then the attacker's card is discarded and the attack is not resolved. The defender resolves the counter effect at the bottom of their card instead. And there may be no greater pleasure in this game than successfully countering an opponent, especially if they'd planned on linking the attack into some crazy combo. If you choose not to block or counter, then you could play an event card. These are typically specific events played in response to a face-down attack. When you do this, you resolve its effect, and then the attacker reveals and resolves their attack card as normal. And once you've gone through the whole turn sequence, the other player will do the same, and this will go back and forth until one player has run out of health. Now, I've glossed over a few details, so keep in mind there are things like EX attacks, ultras, whiffs, and even cards to bait a defender who keeps trying to block your attacks. All of these things are on theme and really help to give those nostalgic vibes for the game. But the core gameplay and the mind games at the table are what really remind me of what it actually feels like to play Street Fighter. So, does the game work? Does it do what it needs to do as a Street Fighter game? Is it fun? Simple answer, yes. Now, admittedly, I had a pretty low bar for what my expectations were for the gameplay of this back when I backed it years ago. Like I said, I was only going for the miniatures, but after having played it now, I really do respect what they've done. And while it's maybe not the deepest fighting game or the deepest card game or even the deepest miniatures game that you could play, I think for what it needs to be a Street Fighter game, it does it really, really well. Aside from the miniatures, the game, in my opinion, is dripping in theme, from the cards to the mechanics. I've got some cards here from Vega. He's got Vega's Claw and Vega's Mask, and then there's a card called Beautify. So Vega's Claw and the Mask can come into play as free actions, and they'll have an ongoing effect on the way Vega plays. He might be able to take advantage of whiffs automatically if the opponent happens to whiff their attacks. Both of these will go out of play or get discarded if Vega takes 3 damage from any single attack. Well, then you can play Beautify to actually pull those cards back out of your discard pile and bring them back into your hand. Now, if you've ever played Street Fighter at all, you're going to recognize how thematic this is. And this is just one example from one character. I've played most of the base characters and some of the ones from the stretch goals, but there are a number of the add-ons that I didn't get here. The game has an incredible amount to offer, and like I said, I think it does what it needs to do for a game like this. Is there luck involved? For sure, there's luck. Obviously, when you're rolling dice, there's going to be luck. But one thing I wanted to mention about the die, there is a tremendous amount of success on this thing. There's actually only one side when you're attacking that's not going to do any sort of success. 4 of the sides will give you some amount of damage, and then the 5th side will give you some meter, if nothing else. And like I've said, this game is far more than just a dice chucker. I mean, obviously you are rolling dice, but that whole counter system really starts to overwhelm both players at the table, because every time someone plays a card face down to attack, the first thing that's going to enter your head is, I wonder what card that is, because maybe I can play a card to counter it and I don't even have to block it at all. The combo system can feel punishing at times, but again, not too terribly punishing, considering it is very much how you might feel when you're playing Street Fighter, when someone happens to pull off some crazy combo that you poorly defend and take a ton of damage. And at the end of the day, the game is so fast-paced that even if someone pulls off some crazy combo against you and does a ton of damage, it doesn't feel overly punishing, because you're probably going to reset the game when it's all over and play again anyway. Which brings me to the fun factor. Is this game fun? Yes, it is. Now, is it the heaviest game in the world? Absolutely not. But if you're going into this looking at it as a game that uses dice, that uses cards that you're drawing from a deck, you have to understand there's going to be some randomness there. You can embrace that and have fun with both the ups and the downs, or not. For me, Street Fighter the miniatures game is just about exactly what it needs to be. The presentation is beautiful, not just the miniatures, but the artwork on the cards, the components, the dice, everything is really just top-notch. If you're looking for a hardcore strategy game, this may not be your cup of tea. It has a fair amount of luck. But if you're looking for a great balance of a little bit of strategy and a little bit of luck and a lot of fun, particularly if you're a fan of Street Fighter, definitely check this game out. If you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. I know I covered some things and glossed over some others, so I'll answer what I can. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and thanks again for watching. Congratulations, you got to the end of one of our videos. Now, if you want more practice, just click on the video over here. It's another video. You might not have seen it yet, so click on it. If you don't want to do that, at least click on the subscription button below. That always helps us. And if you want notifications, please ring that bell.